Okay? We are also pushing that when you're talking about adaptation finance, this should not be given as aid. It should actually be given as grants, no? Because it's in recognition of the principle that the polluter pays. Those countries who contributed much to their current problem of climate should actually help support those countries who were not, really did not contribute to global emissions in the first place. So, but Oxfam, and together with other stakeholders, our partners and other groups, were saying na hindi naman natin pwedeng hintayin dumating yung pera, no, ng adaptation finance. Kasi ngayon pa lang, lahat ng komunidad natin, tinatamaan na ng impacts ng climate change. So, kailangan natin ng resources. Ano ang pwede natin gawin dito mismo sa loob ng sarili nating bayan para harapin at bigyan ng sapat, no, na pera o resources yung mga programa para makatulong sa mga komunidad mag-adapt sa climate change. English, I'm sorry. So, yes, I'm sorry, English. So, next slide, please. So, maybe I will start just by introducing Oxfam. Oxfam, we are an international confederation of 17 organizations. We are working in 92 countries, and we work, as a global movement for change to build a future free from the injustice of poverty. In the Philippines, we've been working here for more than 50 years, with a physical presence for 25 years now. We do support development work in Mindanao. We are more well known as a humanitarian agency, so when there's a crisis or an emergency response, we deliver emergency relief and disaster risk reduction measures. At the same time, we are a campaigning and an advocate both at the global level and at the national level, specifically on economic justice issues. Next slide, please. So as a quick background, in terms of our adaptation and risk reduction needs, we all know, and people always say, that the Philippines is one of the most affected countries on climate. The recent Global Climate Risk Index done by Germanwatch places us at number 10. The agriculture and fisheries and forestry sector is one of the most affected sectors because their productivity is highly dependent on the conditions or variability of weather, the availability of water, and of course the existing natural resources. And also because a significant proportion of the country's poor depends on it for their food and livelihoods. Slide, please. So that adaptation finance really, the previous one, adaptation finance really is an urgent priority for us. And one of the key recommendations that a paper that we did entitled Financing Adaptation or Funding Chaos, Adaptation Finance and Philippine Climate Policy, together with the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, recommended in July 2010 the need to establish a national adaptation fund, which is now named the People's Survival Fund. That paper showed that really the scale of funding is not enough. In the Philippines, that time when we started, there were various estimates on how much we needed to fund adaptation. So it ranged from, for example, 14.4 billion additional to the government budget. This was an estimate done by the Alternative Budget Initiative led by Dr. Briones, to about 21 billion annually, an estimate provided by Governor Joey Salceda. One of the researches done by the DENR showed that really, given that scale, the amount of resources coming from official development assistance also did not meet those needs. So estimates around 130 projects range from about 2.1 billion over a span of more than 10 years. And one thing that the research showed was that a lot more money goes for mitigation, not adaptation. And then actually most of the money coming into the Philippines were primarily loans, and they were not being given as grants. The third, the funds coming in were actually uncoordinated and fragmented. So the useful challenge of having various donors coming in, dealing with other agents, with different agencies, and not coordinating their efforts. And it was not linked to a national plan on adaptation and risk reduction. And of course, there was really no clear sign where vulnerable groups and other stakeholders were part of the process of defining the plan and defining where the resources should go. Next slide, please. So in that process of deliberation and discussion, some recommendations really came out clearly. And that is, aside from having enough resources to effectively address adaptation needs of the country, we really needed good governance of adaptation funds. And the fact is, country ownership and leadership in governance of adaptation finance is very important. It has to be consolidated and rational. So all foreign sources for adaptation needed to be consolidated and coordinated and rationalized. We do have to, as a country, commit domestic resources for adaptation, and that it has to be aligned with the national climate change adaptation plans and local adaptation plans of communities. We hope that any adaptation fund, or resources should actually ensure accountability. There should be meaningful participation from the various stakeholders, especially those who are most vulnerable, and that it really reaches the vulnerable communities, especially women. One of the key issues that came up was that we really needed to also promote direct access, wherein money coming in does not go through various intermediaries or various donors, which should actually really reach community organizations, local government units, who are the ones at the front line of climate change adaptation. Next slide, please. So the People's Survival Fund, which Nishi already mentioned earlier, since 2010, after a lot of campaigning by a lot of various groups, including everyone sitting at the panel this afternoon, it's actually already been passed by Congress just this June. And the People's Survival Fund is actually a fund that complements the national budget. We do say that the national budget is the real adaptation fund, because that adaptation has to be mainstream in your development. So this fund is actually additional. It establishes a major source of adaptation funding for local government units and communities on the ground. It wants to ensure a coherent use and national ownership of all international sources coming in. So it's like pulling all the money coming in into one fund so that government will have final say on how to use this based on a set of criteria and priorities. It hopes to function as a reward fund, something that will accelerate local adaptation action by incentivizing LGUs. LGUs who already have plans, LGUs who already have, for example, based on vulnerability assessments, are the ones really most vulnerable to climate impacts, to be able to access a fund to support their adaptation action. And just to mention that it was already passed by Congress this June. Hopefully, we are hoping that the President will sign it before the State of the Nation address this July. And to mention that it was led at the Senate by Senate President Enrile, and at the House by Congressman Deputy Majority Leader Erin Tanyada, together with a lot of other legislators. It is a special fund in the national, just to mention, where will the money come from for the PSF? So it's a special fund in the National Treasury, only for adaptation. It has an opening balance of 1 billion, which is small, but we say that it serves as a floor. It will be appropriated from the GAA. Its balance may be increased coming in from various donors, and at the same time, it can be augmented by donations, endowments, and the like. It cannot be used for the operational expenses of the Climate Change Commission. It will not revert to the general fund. Next slide, please. I already mentioned, it will be managed by the economic managers of the country. So it will be managed by a board headed by the Secretary of the Department of Finance. And the Climate Change Office, the Climate Change Commission, will be the ones who will evaluate and review the proposals and define the priorities and mechanisms to ensure transparency and proper allocation of the fund. And community representation throughout the whole process is mandatory. So that was the PSF, and it was really all about how can we allocate public resources well to incentivize adaptation action at the ground. The second part of my presentation really focuses on one thing that we're trying to study further. So this is not a final thing, but something that we're studying. Insurance provides protection against losses or damage, as we know, especially to livelihoods affected by hazards. Agricultural use, in the past experience, agri-microinsurance was not usually successful because of a lot of other challenges. So the high cost and the like, the slow payouts. And because of increasing risk due to climate change, the Climate Change Commission Oxfam and the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities conducted like about 4 roundtable discussions, bringing in together all the various stakeholders working on risk insurance to study the viability of what is called weather index-based insurance, if it can really address or help particularly the rural poor manage the risk of climate change. So what is WII? But before that, the Climate Change Act of 2009, which created the Climate Change Commission, mandated it to create an enabling environment for the design of appropriate risk transfer and risk sharing instruments, which is, when you're talking about risk financing, essentially managing risk and consequences through financial products. So WII is like an innovative risk financing scheme being introduced from other countries, which compensates, unlike the regular insurance, compensates based on a specific weather parameter. No? So for example, it's index-based. So in a given community, the regular amount of rainfall, for example, is 240 millimeters. So if the rain within a particular time period reaches 240, for example, and says it becomes 250, then the insurer automatically pays out to the farmers or to those who got the insurance. So it's a weather index-based parameter. The good thing, what people say is that risk insurance, WII, thus shorten, from the insurer's perspective, shortens the claims process, reduces transaction cost, and addresses a lot of the other moral risk associated with traditional multi-peril insurance. For small farmers, and this is where Oxfam's interest comes in, it's interesting because it provides an immediate automatic payout to small farmers in the event of a disaster. Next slide, please. We studied in ongoing WII initiatives in the Philippines, and there are already several. One is being led by MicroInsure Philippines, which is a micro-insurer here, and they provide crop-based insurance, particularly on rice. There is one being done by the International Labour Organization, funded by the MDG Adaptation Fund. And this is particularly notable because WII is actually integrated into an overall risk management project that includes insurance, credit, and extension. And another one, which is called CLIMBS, which actually, it actually insures the loan portfolio of cooperatives. No? So they go through various, the weather risk covered includes drought, typhoon, and rainfall. Next slide, please. In all the discussions, all the models faced similar challenges. The first definitely is around affordability, the farmers' capacity and willingness to pay, and really the doubts within the farmers themselves about WII, given bad experiences with traditional multi-crop insurance. There are, of course, and this is for those who are insurance providers, the most difficult for WII, the technical barriers. It's very important to have precise scientific climate data, not only real-time climate data, but actually historical climate data that's really localized, as in you're talking about municipality or even an aggregation of barangays. And it was very difficult to access information for them. In fact, the 3 models tried to find different ways of accessing climate information. MicroInsure even using actually the services of the Japan Meteorological Agency rather than Pag-asa. And really operational barriers. It was important, all the models actually aggregated the provision of the insurance. And it was very difficult to reach small farmers. And the lack of appropriate WII schemes for marginal fisherfolk and women. Next slide. So some of the key recommendations that came up to scale up and sustain WII was to enhance the regulatory framework for WII. There is an existing regulatory framework for microinsurance. It's already in place in the Philippines. But because WII is such a new thing, there needs to be a more unified definition of WII, what can be the role, for example, of local government units in the delivery of WII products, and how to ensure that payouts actually reach farmers themselves.